listening to Unpause Your Life with Dr. Callie Estes and Master Coach Jenny Fontana, founders of the Life Coach Method. Each one of our uplifting and deep dive episodes is geared to help you tackle the things that hold you back from having the most magnificent life you deserve. Sit back, relax, and prepare to be coached.
Hey everybody, welcome to Unpause Your Life. I am Dr. Callie Estes and very excited today with my guest that I have for you. I have Dr. Peconomou, and he is the Assistant Professor for the Department of Applied Psych and the Director of Behavioral Health and Wellness for Rutgers University. So that's pretty cool. Dr. Pete is a certified mental performance consultant. We're going to get into that in a minute through the Association of Applied Sports Psychology. He is an active member of state and national psych associations, serves on the editorial board of the Journal of Clinical Sports Psychology, and is a frequent contributor for multiple media outlets. Welcome, Dr. Peter.
Welcome, Dr. Kelly. Thanks for having me and looking forward to our conversation.
I am so excited for this. So, first thing I have to ask you is tell me about Rutgers. Tell me about what it's like being the director over there of university athletics.
Yeah, it's a cool thing. I'm actually one of two professors that are in this position of both a tenure track faculty position and working within athletics at these Research One Power 5 Institute. So I always say that's either that we're really smart and we're doing something cutting edge, or we're dumb and it's not going to work. But it's fun. It's fun to be able to kind of bridge the gap of like research with applied work, and it's a great time with the landscape of college athletics changing right in front of our eyes.
Awesome. And how did you get into this work? What made you get into sports psychology versus any other type of psych?
Well, I mean, I've done all types of psych. I mean, I'm board certified in cognitive behavioral therapy, and I know that you work, with addictions and stuff, obviously. And actually, my first clinical placement was at a methadone clinic. So I spent 2 years treating opioid addiction by accident, which I was, I always say that I wish that was like a requirement of training. But I grew up in a family of athletes. Cousins played professional baseball, brothers, and so I was the last born, and I didn't like following their footsteps, so I started swimming to do something different, and I swam at the highest levels, and had a pretty cool career. And then so just all that tied together, going to grad school and having this experience of working and competing at a high level, I was like, oh, there's a lot that goes on in the brain, just in terms of mental health, right? But then also just for performance.
So, if I'm correct, you've done work with collegiate athletes and also NFL. Is that correct?
I worked, well, yep, all pretty much every professional league. And so the NHL, MLS, NFL, the major leagues. So our practice is, throughout New Jersey, New York, and so we tend to kind of work with athletes that might be in that area. And then, yeah, at the intercollegiate level, I developed a program at Seton Hall University first, which is in the Big East Conference. That's where I did all my studies. I was an athlete myself there. And so there was no program like that when I was graduating. When I was an undergrad competing, there was no, mental health or sports psychology department. So I developed it. And now it would be hard to find a school that doesn't have some sports psychology services for their student athletes.
Right. What's the difference working with collegiate level versus pro level? I've done pro level. I've never done collegiate. What's the
Yeah.
differences if you're dealing with, a player at those two different levels, mindset wise, education wise? What do you see?
Well, I'll tell you, and hopefully none of my pros ever listen to this. I'd rather work with the collegiate athletes any day of the week. I would tell them this, though, actually. But that's because, 18 to 22-year-old brain is like super cool. It's really it's still developing. We know that from a developmental psychology perspective. And so I believe that I can have a greater impact. I always say, especially in cognitive behavioral therapy, my job is to not have a job. And so, if I can kind of have an impact of somebody that's, struggling with something at this early intervention stage, at 18 to 22, then maybe I have less work, with pros down the road because they've already got the tools. I mean, that's what life's about. It's just about just gaining tools.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. And when you're dealing with these guys, what's the number one thing you see that they lack or that they can't wrap their head around when you're dealing with them specifically in the athletic capacity?
Yeah, I think that's uh, you know, I don't know. It's a really good question. I don't know if there's like one thing that they lack. Maybe I'd say insight, because 18-year-olds aren't always thinking about other things. They don't usually have like a CBT term like perspective taking. They're not super psychologically or cognitively flexible. They're really just sort of focused on whatever's in front of them, which is both a blessing and a curse. Sometimes I wish I could still be that way, like my 18-year-old self that was just, sure, I'll go to London for a weekend, or things like that. Um,
When you had no responsibilities and doing the laundry was the hardest activity you had for the day.
Oh man, it's such a hard thing, and I'm very mindful never to say that, because of course sometimes I'm like, enjoy this while you have it, which is like the worst thing you can say to an 18 to 22-year-old, um, because we know that, looking back, right? We know hindsight's 2020, but it's yeah. So maybe insight is the one thing that's lacking.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
And how do you incorporate mindfulness into what they're trying to do? How do you bridge that with them? Because athletics is so action focused. Like if the outcome is what they're
yeah,
looking for, right? We have to win. That's it. There's really
yeah.
like nothing in between. So how do you get them to bridge that with mindfulness? What does that look like in the landscape of athletics?
Yeah, I think I mean, you're like that's the nail on the head. I'd say that most high performers and the athletes I work with, they struggle with it initially, but show me someone who doesn't. I think if most of us, especially in today's world, struggle to slow down, um, and it is a little like antithetical in a way where it's like in order to perform at the highest level and be the most successful, you actually have to slow down. You have to find some kind of balance, some kind of self-care, some kind of way of just navigating this stuff because otherwise you're just going to burn out. And so the mindfulness, to be honest, when I first started doing, so a little bit of my journey, like I studied uh, Zen Buddhism, or still study with my Zen teacher, and so that's sort of how I got introduced to mindfulness. And about like 15 years ago or so, we weren't talking about it in the same way. Would you agree with me on that? Like, 15 years ago, people maybe didn't even know what mindfulness was, especially in like our psychology world.
Completely
Um,
agree with you. It was all about
yeah,
evidence-based outcome. Everything was
right,
evidence-based, evidence-based, and if you had a
right,
feeling that wasn't evidence-based, then you didn't have a feeling.
right. It was invalid. Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So I think when I started to introduce it to some clients and sort of practice it, people would be like, "What is this?" And it kind of felt weird or whatever about it. But now, fast forward, people seek us out for that. They're like, "Oh, how I want a mindfulness coach." So even in like the business world. So I think that business worlds and sport worlds, like they tend to kind of have these parallel processes where whether it's like how do the business world uses like HR personnel assessment, to uh, build effective teams. At sports, evaluate, player psychological makeups to determine if they're going to be a good kind of fit for the team. So all these sort of things happen together, and so now, I find myself coaching a lot of like executives, around mindfulness and well-being, and then now, the sport world is looking for that too. So, lastly, in almost every office I have like the upside down U. So the performance curve, the Yerkes Dodson, and kind of helping people just visualize that you need to have the right amount of stress. But if you have too much and you're not taking care of yourself, you will underperform. And I think that having that like right in front of them it's hard to deny. And mindfulness is the tool that I think kind of helps you achieve that perfect balance to then perform at your highest.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think there are parallels to the way athletes perform to the way executives perform. And then
Hmm.
even, the average person when they say, "Well, I want to do more," and then they're sitting there binge watching Netflix. It's like, "Okay, well,
Right.
let's not watch Netflix." And they say, "Well, that's my downtime." Well, you're spending 3,
Right.
4 hours a night watching Netflix, and then they're saying, "Well, if I could just, work from home or I could do something different." And they can't wrap their
Right.
head around, getting the things and getting out of their own way of where they need to be.
Yeah, for sure. And and especially like with all these different challenges in life, and of course, your specialty of addiction, like it's just a thing that everyone is impacted by. And so finding a way just to navigate that is critical.
What advice would you give to somebody who said, I really want to perform at an optimal level, but I'm not. I can't seem to get there. How do you approach it? What would you say to them?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a one size fits all. I'm sure you realize that. And so it's really, I think that's the art of what we do. I think we could have all this evidence-based practice and all this research to support whatever it is that we're doing. Look, I don't want to. Hopefully, it's guided by some science. I think we want to have some of that. But in the end, the art part of what we do. And so I think the art for me, for that person who's like, hey, it's just not working, is just finding what does work. It's there. It's going to be different for each person. And for me, I love that. It's kind of like the challenge of, all right, what's your formula? And let's go find it, because it's like it's not the same.
And then you have a workbook too. How are the exercises directed? Are they directed for everybody or a specific group of people that can access and utilize them?
Yeah, the mindfulness workbook for beginners, it's really one of, if not the only, the publisher has said it's the only. But it's a very generally based mindfulness book, so it's not like specific to addictions or anxiety or things like that. It's really geared towards the general population, and it just kind of gives a little bit of a blueprint for how you could start and then integrate this into one's life. It's I don't see how someone can't be doing it. Like you have to have some kind of well-being, you have to have wellness, you have to have mindfulness. It just is, it's such a powerful tool. But it really could be the opposite of how many of us are wired. Like if I'm a high performing artist, I'm not used to kind of being calm. I thrive off of being a little kind of edgy. And so finding sort of the way to balance that edge with some kind of peace. I think, who doesn't want peace? I mean, I don't know. I mean, how else do you think people find peace in their lives? What would you say?
Yeah, that's that's interesting. So let me
Yeah.
bounce off of that and then ask you this question. So we talk about mindfulness. We've been talking about this for years. This is the work we do. And then all of a sudden, someone comes along on a TikTok and goes, let's be hashtag mindful, hashtag demure. And it takes off like wildfire. What do
Yeah,
you think of that as a professional that's been preaching this for so long?
I love it. I love it. I absolutely love it. I think Jules. I think it's
Yes.
wonderful. I forget. I just, it's the world we're in. I was having a conversation with a colleague the other day, and I was like, this person who has, 40 years experience and is like super influential, but is older, has like very little impact compared to this, 18-year-old who's a rising star and a potential first round draft pick, like who has 3 million followers already, So I
Hmm.
think it's cool. The more we can get, I've always felt the more, and thanks for having me on your show. I mean, this is why I do this stuff. I think the more we can get this out there, you know, and especially my Zen training, and just, I do believe this is my vocation. And it's like, how do I kind of help people suffer a little less? And I think the more we can get it out there, the better. And if that's what someone connects with, I love that stuff. And so just let's bring it on.
That's awesome. What's the favorite thing you do? Out of all the things you offer and do, what's your favorite thing to do?
Wow, that's such a that's a really good question.
I ask the hard questions.
You do, I know, because it's, and then of course you feel like you have to have the high performer in me feels like I have to have the right answer, which of course really isn't. My annoying like political answer first, and maybe that gives me some time to think about the real answer. But I think, I really feel blessed and kind of charged to just do what I do. Like sometimes just to see someone just open up and like kind of deal with their trauma, kind of work on something that's been really bothering them, that they've been suffering with. It really is a blessing, and it sounds a little cheesy, I understand that, but I really feel it's a calling. And I think it's and I'm not great at it with everybody. I think it's just something that kind of, when we connect. But um, one thing that I tell students all the time is that we're not fans. So I think people think my job's sexy and kind of fun, on sidelines of games and with all these, cool athletes with millions of followers and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, but I don't talk about, I'm not legally allowed to talk about them. HIPAA is, protected. I can't say who I know and don't know. And, it's not about that really. It's about this journey of healing. And I think maybe that's what it is. I think it's just been this kind of journey, like to be a co-pilot on someone's journey of healing is just really such a cool thing to do. And I feel like that's where I'm at with it, this whole healing
I like how you answered that because I get that question all the time. Who have you worked with? And I'm like, well, there's this thing called
yeah.
HIPAA. Oh, yeah, but just tell me. I
Yes,
won't tell anybody. I'm like, there's still this thing
I
called
know.
HIPAA.
Yeah,
But my favorite one was I was getting on a plane and I
yeah,
sat down next to this guy in first class, tall basketball player. He had a hat
yeah,
on and he had this little scarf over his face. And I just sat down next to
yeah,
him. Everybody walking by is asking for his autograph. And I didn't know who he was. I really didn't because when I
yeah.
work with clients, I'm sure like you're like, okay, I know you while I work with you, and then I forget you and go on to the next person because that's how we do
That's
it.
right.
And
Yeah,
I sat down next to him and he goes, well, I guess you want my autograph too. And I looked at him and I went, why? Do you want mine? And he
yeah,
goes,
yeah.
do I want
I love
yours? I'm
it.
like, do you know who I am? And he just
Yeah,
stopped. And I said, well, let me show you who I am. And I started talking to
yeah,
him and he just looked at me sideways and he's like, you're pretty cool. I'm like, I still don't know who you are. And then he
yeah.
told me and I'm like, I still don't know who you are. And
Oh my God, I
I
love
find
it.
that interesting because it's the same exact thing. We get asked all the time, who do you know? Who do you work with? And I'm like, I'm so focused on the work that it's not the
Yes.
person that your accomplishments are awesome, but it's not the number one thing I look at when I'm working with you.
Yeah, I love that. And so I think we share that, and we all put our pants on the same way, like I think there's a real kind of I think one of the things I always focus, this is part of my Zen training or just my human experience, is that we're all more similar than different. And whether, you're a huge celebrity or, you know, whatever, doing whatever you're doing, we are way more alike than different.
That's true. Now,
Mhm.
hearing that, I'm going to ask you this. What was the experience of your most challenging client like?
It's, and I think they're always really good lessons. I mean, I think that's the supervisor in me. And so having, being an academic, somebody who both, so I do both research and I train, graduate students to do this work. And so it's really nice to be able to bring those challenges into the case conceptualization and case presentations to help others kind of go through this. There's not one person that comes to mind. I think in general, challenging people, that's the human experience, so there's definitely been people who have, pushed boundaries, sexualizing a person, the work that we do is the most intimate thing out there. And I know that you agree with me on that. And in today's world, I always say it's like super challenging because, like say, for example, my colleagues who are, professors or academics, they don't close their doors with students anymore, because there's just a lot of sort of vulnerabilities in life. And, um, it's a real sort of concern. I get it, but like I have to, from a clinical perspective, if because of HIPAA, like you said, we have to close our doors. So it's a real vulnerable experience. But I think being able to kind of push somebody, to get to where they want to be is a real, a real challenge. But I guess there's been some, sort of, personality disorders or things like that. But I would say, there's not one person or something that comes to mind, because I think each of us are so unique, and I'm sure some of my therapists may have said that I was a difficult client.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's tough work we do, and it's
yeah,
exhausting work we do. How do you handle burnout?
yeah. I do practice what I preach. Uh, I'd say like at least to 90% efficacy. So, because I'm not perfect, and so practicing what I preach means, Callie, I love, I love spas, I love massages, I love acupuncture. Um, I'm married to a healer, and so we focus to take care of ourselves a lot. I sleep really well. I exercise. I meditate a lot. I joke with my family, so if there's any kind of crisis in the family, I'm like, this is why I meditate a lot. Or one of my brothers is complaining about my mom or my dad, I'll be like, that's why I meditate a lot. So I think that that's a real gift, because you're you're transforming your brain. I mean, I do some research now looking at meditation mindfulness with functional MRIs and looking at how the brain shifts. And, we've got some budding research around there on that. And I just think it's like so fascinating. And we're just at the infant stages of some of that work. So my well-being plan is pretty robust, and I do commit to it. So my team will tell you that I kind of present like a kind of hectic and lunatic and just kind of all over the place. But on the inside, I'm like usually pretty calm because I've just done all that work. So I get a lot done, but I'm not really fazed by it.
So you're operating as a high functioning individual while dealing with high functioning individuals.
That's right. That's right. And I don't know that, I mean, I think anyone could do the work, but
Mm-hmm.
I do think that understanding the sort of, that it's more than just like 9 to 5, I'm sure you don't work 9 to 5.
No, 24/7 if I am on the payment schedule,
That's right.
concierge style, I can be available at their discretion, um,
That's right.
which makes it fun and interesting and also hectic at times. I'm sure you know.
Yep. Oh, yes. Absolutely.
So how do my listeners find you? They want to reach out, they want a consult, they want a session, they want to buy your book. Where do they find you? Where do they go?
All things official Dr. Pete. So there's officialdrpete.com, and all the social handles are official Dr. Pete. So, check me out, and, happy to kind of help. Or I always say I'm always happy to kind of direct someone wherever they got to go. It doesn't have to do with me, but with somebody that I might know or kind of connect them with there.
Awesome. And we'll put all those links up for the listeners so that you can find Dr. Pete very easily and find the books and websites and everything to reach out. And I wanted to thank you for coming on. Do you have any last words for our listeners or any one piece of advice you would give someone listening?
I mean, one of the ones I always like to end with is that, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. And so I think just kind of working on a plan to eliminate suffering, and just think about today, what kind of suffering you created, and are there things that you can put into place and implement so that you can eliminate some of that suffering today?
Awesome. That's good advice. All right. Well, thank you so
Thank
much for
you.
coming on. And you have been listening to another episode of Unpause Your Life with Dr. Callie Estes and my guest, Dr. Pete. Look for everything on our social media. We'll put up there that you can go directly to him and get his book or hire him for a consult or session. All right. Have a great day, guys.
Thank you for listening to Unpause Your Life with Dr. Callie Estes and Master Coach Jenny Fontana. Head over to www.thelifecoachmethod.com to learn more about coaching yourself and how to become a master coach.